Rain lashes, stone and skin alike, as the deepened wall shudders, not from storm, but from the tread of an army. The night above Helm's deep is torn by fire and black smoke, by the shriek of orcs and the bellow of Uruk-hai. Men stumble, dying, in the mud of the culvert breach. The Hornburg gate buckles, and somewhere amid the chaos a horn of silver answers, the horn of Rohan. Pale banners ripple where no banner should be, and elven eyes watch men about to fall. If you want more journeys into these darker, stranger paths of Middle-earth, tap like, subscribe, and tell me in the comments what realm you would stand for when the darkness comes. Gondor's walls, Rohan's fields, or the hidden woods of the elves. Where would you make your last stand? The horn call rolls back from the cliffs like a challenge to the storm. And in the high chamber of the Hornburg, Aragorn, son of Arathorn, feels the sound twist something in his chest. He had expected only the horns of Rohan this night, thin and desperate. This horn is high and clear, woven of silver and starlight. Gimli, panting beside him, squints toward the deeping coombe, his beard dripping with rain and blood. More orcs? He growls, hefting his axe, or some new devilry of Saruman? Aragorn does not answer. His hand tightens on Anduril's hilt, and for a heartbeat the world narrows to the echo of that call and the memory of another sound far away beneath golden leaves. The soft ring of mail as an elf lord descended white steps in Caras Galadhrim. Far to the east, under those same golden boughs, the choice that shapes this night had been made. The Fellowship stood then on the green sward before Galadriel and Celeborn, their boats laden, their hearts heavy. The lady had spoken her farewell, her eyes resting on each of them in turn, on Frodo with his hidden burden, on Boromir already shadowed by desire, on Aragorn torn between love and doom. But when she turned last to Haldir of Lorien, standing with his guard at the edge of the glade, her gaze had lingered. Long have the Galadhrim watched the shadow grow, Galadriel had said, her voice soft as the wind in the melon, yet carrying to every ear. Long have we hidden behind our power while the world beyond our borders burned. That time is ending. Celeborn's hands had tightened on the rail of the Talon. My lady, he had murmured, we have spoken of this. We have, she answered, and though her face was serene, there was a strange brightness in her eyes, like the first light of dawn on snow. And now I speak my will before all. She turned to Aragorn. In other days the elves went to war for the sake of men, when first the shadow rose. That hour returns. The Rohirrim ride alone to their doom, their king beset, their fields ravaged. Saruman's hand stretches toward the last free strongholds of the west. Aragorn had felt the weight of her regard like a hand upon his brow. The choice is not yours alone, lady, he had said. Your people are few, and your time in Middle-earth wanes. Galadriel's smile had been faint, sad, and unyielding. Our time wanes whether we act or hide, but if we go, perhaps something of our grace will pass into the world we leave behind. Perhaps men will remember that we did not depart in silence while their houses burned. She had turned then to Haldir. Captain of the northern marches, she said, and the leaves seemed to still, listening. Will you lead a host of Lorien to the aid of the Rohirrim if need calls? Will you bear the memory of our people into the last battles of this age? Haldir had not hesitated. He had seen the smoke over Moria, heard the distant thunder of drums as the Fellowship fled. He had seen the lines of grief in the faces of men and halflings and dwarves alike. If you command it, my lady, he had said, bowing his golden head, we will go. We will stand where we are needed. Celeborn had stepped forward, his voice sharp. This is no small thing, to send our warriors beyond the Anduin into the lands of men to bleed for their wars. Their wars are now ours, Galadriel had replied, not turning, for if the shadow triumphs, there will be no more Lorien, not for long. The sea calls us husband, but we will not flee like cowards in the dark. There had been a silence then, deep and troubled. Legolas, standing near, had met Haldir's eyes. Between them passed a wordless recognition that something old was ending and something terrible and beautiful was beginning. "You will not go alone," Legolas had said quietly. "If the paths of the Fellowship lead to Rohan, I will bear witness that the Galadhrim came." Galadriel had nodded once, as if sealing some unseen bond. So be it. When the shadow moves upon the plains of Rohan, the Galadhrim will answer. This I foretell, and this I command. The Fellowship had departed soon after, their boats gliding down the Anduin, the golden wood receding behind them. But in the high halls of Caras Galadon, messengers had already begun to run, and in the deep armories beneath the roots of the Melern, long silent forges had awakened. Now at Helm's Deep, the echo of that choice arrives like a storm on the wind. On the deeping wall, torches gutter in the rain, orcs roar and press forward, their ladders scraping against stone slick with blood. Men of the West Fold, farmers and shepherds turned soldiers, brace their spears with shaking hands. "Hold!" Aragorn cries in the common speech, his voice hoarse yet clear. "Hold the wall for Rohan and the White Horse." His words are flung back at him on a wave of snarls and jeers. Arrows hiss past his face. Somewhere to his left, a man screams as he is dragged from the parapet. Gimli, peering over the edge between two crenels, bellows a dwarven curse and buries his axe in the skull of a climbing Uruk. "Two already," he shouts, his eyes gleaming. "Beat that." "Elf!" But Legolas is not on the wall beside him. He stands instead upon the steps of the Hornburg, his gaze fixed on the dark beyond the deeping coombe, where the horn of silver has sounded again. Closer now. His breath catches as he sees them. They move like a river of shadow and light, gliding between the rocks and scrub of the coombe, their mails shining dully in the rain, their helms crested with night-dark plumes. Banners of green and white, embroidered with the golden flower of Lorien, stream behind them. At their head rides Haldir, his hair bound back with a simple circlet, his face calm and grave. In his hand he bears no banner, but a long spear tipped with a leaf-shaped blade that seems to catch what little light the storm allows. Beside him, bearing a taller standard worked in silver and gold, rides a younger elf, his eyes wide, his jaw tight. These are not the immortal, untroubled figures of song. They are warriors, come far from home to die if need be. Legolas feels something hot and painful rise in his throat. For a moment, he is no longer in the cold stone fortress of men, but under the eaves of Mirkwood, watching his father's warriors march out and not all return. Then the memory shatters under the weight of the present. He turns, running up the steps, his voice ringing in the hall. "Aragorn, Gimli, they have come!" Aragorn meets him at the top of the stair, his face streaked with grime. "Who?" he demands. "Reinforcements from Edoras? Gandalf?" "Neither," Legolas says, and his eyes are bright with something like joy and fear mingled. "The Galadhrim." For a heartbeat, Aragorn simply stares. He had hoped, in some quiet corner of his heart, that Galadriel's words might not be only comfort, that the elves would not pass away wholly, leaving men to stand alone in the last battles. But hope is a dangerous thing in war, and he had learned not to lean upon it. Now hope rides up the deeping coombe under starlight hidden by storm. "Gimli," he says, turning to the dwarf, who has just clambered up, breathing hard, "you wanted a fair count. You shall have it. The elves are here." Gimli snorts, though his eyes widen. "About time some of your kin showed their faces in a proper fight," he mutters, but there is a grudging respect in his tone. Below, the Rohirrim on the wall falter, their cries wavering as they too hear the unfamiliar horn, see the pale ranks emerging from the darkness. For one terrible instant, dread grips them. Another enemy? Another host of the White Wizard? Then someone shouts, "Elves! They are elves!" And a ripple of astonished relief runs along the wall. King Theoden, standing near the gate with Gamling at his side, leans forward, his white hair plastered to his face by rain. "Elves," he repeats, as if the word is from an old song and not the world before his eyes. "At Helm's Deep?" Gamling, who has seen many winters and believed many tales only half, squints into the murk. "So it seems, my lord," he says slowly, "though I never thought to see the day." Theoden's jaw clenches. He has no love for those who dwell apart while his people bleed, yet in this hour pride is a thin shield. "If they come to fight, we will welcome them," he says at last. "Open the postern gate. Let them in before the orcs cut them off." The postern gate grinds open, and a wedge of elven warriors sweeps through, swift and silent. They move with the coordination of centuries, shields locking, spears lowered, as they carve a path through the pressing Uruk-hai toward the base of the wall. Haldir rides at their rear until he is within bowshot of the parapet. Then he dismounts in one fluid motion, handing his reins to a young elf with a murmured word. He looks up, rain streaming down his face, and sees Legolas standing above, Anduril's wielder at his side. For a moment, across the gulf of stone and storm, their gazes meet. "Haldir of Lorien," Aragorn calls, his voice carrying over the din. "You are most welcome." Haldir's lips curve in a faint, wry smile. "We bring word from the Lady of the Wood," he answers, his Sindarin accent lilting even in the harsh common speech. "Where her friends are beset, there shall the Galadhrim stand." Legolas laughs once. A bright sound amid the roar of battle. "You came." Haldir's eyes soften. "We came," he says simply. Then his expression hardens and he gestures to the ranks behind him. "Archers to the wall, spears to the breach. Let us show these spawn of Isengard what it means to face the firstborn." As the elven archers mount the steps, their movements smooth and swift despite the press of men, a murmur runs through the Rohirrim. Some stare in open awe at the fair faces and shining mail. Others glance away, uneasy, as if the presence of these ancient beings makes their own mortality too stark. A young rider, scarcely more than a boy, clutches his spear and leans toward his companion. "My grandfather told me of elves," he whispers, "said they were fading, leaving us to stand alone." His companion, older, scarred, shrugs. "Fading or not, lad, they are here now." That is enough. On the wall, an elf with a longbow taller than many men takes his place beside a grizzled Westfold archer. Their shoulders brush as they notch arrows. The man glances sideways. "Can you see in this cursed rain?" he asks gruffly. The elf's mouth twitches. "Well enough," he replies, and lets fly. His arrow whistles through the storm, striking an Uruk in the eye at a distance that makes the Rohirrim gasp. A dozen more follow from his kin, each finding its mark with uncanny precision. Within moments, the pressure on the wall eases, ladders topple backward under volleys of elven shafts, and the howls of the orcs grow more ragged. But Saruman's host is vast, and elven steel is not limitless. In the deep encoomb, the main body of the Galadhrim forms a shining line before the Hornburg, shields overlapping, spears braced. The Uruk-hai crash against them like a black tide against a cliff. For a time, the elves hold. They move with a terrible grace, their blades flashing, their voices rising in harsh battle cries that carry echoes of older wars, of Gondolin's fall, of the last stand on the slopes of Orodruin. Every stroke is precise, every step measured. Where they stand, the Uruk-hai die in heaps. From the wall, Gimli watches, his eyes alight. "Ha!" he cries, "not bad for folk who sing to trees. Still, I would like to see how they fare when the ladders reach them." Legolas, loosing arrow after arrow, does not answer. His mind flickers between past and present, between the memory of Galadriel's resolve and the sight of her people bleeding in the rain. He had not truly believed she would send them. He had known her power, her foresight, her will. But he had also known the deep weariness of the Eldar, their long retreat from the world of men. To commit so many of the Galadhrim to a mortal war is to accept that many will never see the shores of Valinor. He wonders, as he draws and releases, if she wept when Haldir's host departed. In Caras Galadon, she had stood upon her high flet and watched the long columns of warriors pass beneath the golden boughs. Their armor gleamed, their faces were set, and the sound of their marching feet had been like a drumbeat of time itself. Celeborn had stood beside her, his hands clasped behind his back, his eyes shadowed. "This is madness," he had said, not for the first time. "We are too few. We cannot win the wars of men for them." "We do not go to win their wars," Galadriel had answered, her gaze never leaving the line of march. "We go to stand beside them, so that when the darkness comes, they will not say that the Eldar turned away." Celeborn's jaw had clenched. "And what of our own people? Every life we send is a light that may never be rekindled. Our children will have fewer to guide them west." Galadriel's hand had tightened on the rail. "Our children will have a world to sail from," she had said softly. "If we do this, if we do nothing, there may be no west to reach." He had looked at her then, searching her face. "You have seen this?" "I have seen many paths," she had replied. "In most Rohan falls, in many Gondor follows, in some even the ring-bearer falters, for hope is a fragile thing when all around is ruin. But there is a slender road where the courage of men is kindled by the memory of the Eldar, where they stand a little taller, because they know we did not abandon them. On that road, the darkness is less deep." Celeborn had closed his eyes briefly. When he opened them, there was resignation in them and love. "Then we walk that road," he had said, "though it lead us to our ending. Now, at Helm's Deep, the price of that choice is counted in blood." The Uruk-hai, driven by Saruman's will and the promise of man-flesh, do not break under the first shock. They surge again and again against the elven line, their heavy shields battering, their pikes thrusting. For every 10 that fall, 5 press forward over their bodies. An elf in the front rank, his hair braided with small silver leaves, parries a thrust and drives his spear into an Uruk's throat. As he withdraws it, another pike catches him under the arm, slipping through a gap in his mail. He gasps, crimson blooming across his green tunic, and goes to his knees. His nearest comrade shifts, stepping into his place without a word, his shield sliding over the fallen elf's body. The line holds, But the dead elf's eyes stare up at the rain, unseeing. Far above, on the wall, a Rohirrim archer sees him fall. The man swallows hard. He had grown up on tales of elves, of their beauty and their seeming invincibility. To see one die like any mortal shakes him. A thought crosses his mind, unbidden. If even they can fall, what chance have we? Then he hears a voice at his elbow. "Do not falter," says the elf beside him, the one whose arrows never miss. "We stand together now. That is our strength." The man nods, his jaw set, and looses another shaft. On the far side of the wall at the culvert breach, the battle has become a churning chaos of mud and bodies. The explosion that shattered the wall has left a gaping wound through which orcs pour like black water. Aragorn is there, and Duril, a bright arc in the gloom, his breath coming in ragged gasps. Beside him, Gimli roars, his axe rising and falling. They fight on a narrow ledge of broken stone, one misstep away from the flooded trench. "Aragorn!" Gimli grunts between blows. "We cannot hold much longer. There are too many." "I know," Aragorn replies, his voice raw. He glances over his shoulder, seeking any sign of relief. He sees it in the form of a wedge of elven spears driving toward the breach, Haldir at their head. The elf captain's face is streaked with blood, his eyes narrowed against the rain. He has already taken a cut to his cheek, a bruise darkening along his jaw. But his movements are as sure as ever. "Make way," he calls as he nears. "Galadhrim, to the breach!" Aragorn steps aside just enough to let the elves pass, then falls in beside Haldir. For a moment, they fight back to back, as if they have trained together for years rather than met only twice. "Your lady keeps her word," Aragorn says between strokes. "She does," Haldir answers. "And you, Dunedain? Will you keep yours, if you survive this night?" Aragorn knows what he means. The promise he made in Lorien to take up his destiny, to claim the kingship of Gondor, if he can, to stand not as a wandering ranger, but as the leader men need. "If I survive," he says, his teeth bared, "I will not hide in the wilds again." Haldir gives a tight, grim smile. "Then fight to live, for the sake of more than yourself." A massive Uruk, taller and broader than most, charges the breach, wielding a crude two-handed axe. He swings at Haldir, who ducks, the blade whistling over his head. Aragorn steps in, driving Andúril through the creature's chest. It bellows and collapses, its weight nearly dragging the sword from his hand. For a few precious minutes, the combined strength of men, dwarves, and elves holds the breach. The Uruk-hai pile up in heaps, their blood mingling with the rain, turning the water in the trench black. Above them, on the wall, Legolas feels the tide shift just slightly. He risks a glance toward the horizon, where the first faint paling of the eastern sky might soon appear if the storm breaks. Somewhere out there, Gandalf rides. Legolas clings to that knowledge like a lifeline, but Saruman has not yet played all his pieces. Deep within the pits of Isengard, before his host marched, the White Wizard had bent his will not only to breeding orcs and Uruk-hai, but to something older and darker. He had delved into the lore of Morgoth, seeking to bind lesser spirits of flame and shadow into crude forms of flesh and iron. What he made were not Balrogs, not truly. They were pale imitations, unstable, dangerous even to his own forces, but they burned. Now, as the battle rages at Helm's Deep, 3 hulking shapes move among the rear ranks of the Uruk-hai. Their skin is blackened and cracked, glowing faintly at the seams with inner fire. Chains of iron wrap their limbs, etched with runes of compulsion. Their eyes are pits of ember. The orcs surrounding them give them a wide berth, muttering. Even they fear what Saruman has wrought. At a guttural command from a black-caped Uruk captain, the chained creatures are driven forward, prodded by long spears. They lumber toward the base of the wall, their mere presence making the rain hiss where it touches them. On the parapet, an elf scents something on the wind, a whiff of scorched stone and old fear. He looks down, and his face goes very still. Balkoth, he whispers, fire rot. The word spreads along the elven ranks, a shiver of unease. They have seen such things before, in ages long past, in the service of darker masters. One of the creatures reaches the wall and lays a hand upon it. The stone blackens, steaming. Hairline cracks begin to worm outward from its touch. "Bring it down!" Haldir shouts, his voice cutting through the roar. "Archers, aim for the eyes, the joints!" A volley of arrows rains down on the fire creature. Many shafts burst into flame as they strike its skin, but some find the softer flesh at its eyes, its mouth, the gaps in its crude armor. It bellows, a sound like a forge roaring to life, and staggers. Another reaches the wall untouched. It presses both hands against the stone and pushes. The deeping wall groans. Cracks race outward, meeting old scars from the culvert blast. Men and elves alike feel the stone shift under their feet. Legolas, judging the distance, leaps from the parapet to a lower ledge, then to the ground. He lands in a crouch, rolls, and comes up running toward the creature, his knives drawn. "Legolas!" Gimli cries, seeing him go. "You mad elf!" Aragorn at the breach hears the roar of the fire creature and the grinding of stone. He looks up, eyes widening as he sees the wall begin to buckle. If that section falls, the Uruk-hai will pour through in an unstoppable wave. "Haldir!" he shouts. "We must stop it!" Haldir is already moving, his spear in hand. He runs along the inner base of the wall, his long legs eating the distance. His cloak whips behind him, stained with mud and blood. The fire creature's hands sink deeper into the stone. Flames lick from its fingers, crawling along the cracks. With a sound like a mountain sighing, a great section of the wall begins to topple outward. Legolas reaches the creature first. He throws himself toward it, slamming one knife into its eye. The blade sinks deep, and the creature shrieks, its whole body convulsing. Heat sears his hand, his skin blisters. He grits his teeth, driving the second knife into the joint of its neck. For a moment, it seems to work. The creature staggers back, tearing free of the wall. The stone, half broken, slumps, but does not fully collapse. Then the second creature, wounded but still burning, lurches forward and slams its shoulder into the weakened section. The wall gives way. Stone crashes down in a thunderous cascade, crushing orcs and elves alike. A cloud of dust and steam billows outward, mingling with the rain. Haldir, sprinting toward the collapsing section, sees Legolas vanish in the falling debris. His heart stutters. "Legolas!" he cries, but his voice is lost in the roar. On the wall above, Gimli stares in horror as the parapet crumbles. He loses his footing and tumbles backward, barely catching himself on a jag of stone. "Aragorn!" he bellows. "The elf! I see," Aragorn says, his voice tight. He cannot reach the fallen section in time. The breach is already straining under renewed assault. He feels the cruel hand of choice close around his throat. If he abandons the breach, the fortress falls. If he stays, Legolas may die. For a heartbeat, he wavers. Then Haldir makes the choice for him. The elf captain plunges into the dust cloud. heedless of the heat still radiating from the dying fire creature. He coughs, eyes stinging, and gropes among the tumbled stones. His hand brushes cloth, then hair. He digs frantically, his fingers bleeding as he pries rocks aside. At last he uncovers Legolas' face, pale and smeared with ash, his eyes closed. "Legolas!" Haldir gasps, shaking him. "Wake!" Legolas' lashes flutter. He draws a ragged breath, then coughs, spitting dust. "I am not so easily rid of, Haldir," he rasps. Relief floods Haldir so swiftly it is almost painful. "You have a talent for falling where the stone is thickest," he says, forcing lightness into his tone. Legolas manages a faint, crooked smile. "And you for finding me." Around them, Uruk-hai begin to clamber over the broken wall, drawn by the gap. Haldir rises, pulling Legolas up with him. "Can you stand?" he demands. Legolas tests his weight. His left leg buckles, something in his thigh protests sharply. "Not well," he admits. "Then lean on me," Haldir says. We fall back to the keep. The wall is lost. They stagger toward the Hornburg gate, half running, half limping, as orcs swarm over the rubble behind them. Arrows hiss past. One grazes Haldir's arm. Another thuds into the ground at Legolas' feet. On the breach, Aragorn sees them coming. His heart lifts, then clenches as he sees the horde at their heels. "Gamling!" he shouts. "Cover them! Archers, to the rubble!" A volley of arrows arcs overhead, thinning the press of orcs just enough for Haldir and Legolas to slip through the gate as it slams shut behind them. Inside the Hornburg, the air is thick with smoke and fear. Women and children huddle in the great hall, their eyes wide, their whispers sharp with terror. Éowyn moves among them, her jaw set, her hand steady, even as her heart pounds. She hears the crash of the walls fall, the distant screams. She closes her eyes for a moment, then opens them, her gaze hardening. She will not weep while others fight. As Haldir and Legolas enter the keep, supported by Rohirrim, Éowyn turns to meet them. She stops, startled at the sight of the elf captain, his fair face streaked with blood. "You are hurt," she says, stepping forward before she can think. Haldir shakes his head. "It is nothing," he replies. He gestures to Legolas. "See to him, if you can. He took the worst of the fall." Legolas protests weakly, but Éowyn's glare silences him. "Sit," she orders, pointing to a bench. "You will be of no use if you fall again." As she binds his leg with swift, sure hands, Legolas studies her face. There is a fierce beauty in it, a flame that reminds him strangely of Galadriel's long ago, when she still walked under starlight unshadowed by the sea. "You are Éowyn," he says quietly, "Lady of Rohan." She stiffens, surprised. "You know my name?" "I have ears," he replies, a hint of humor in his voice, "and eyes. I see one who would rather ride with sword in hand than bind wounds in a hall." Her jaw tightens. "My uncle forbids it," she says. "He would have me safe while others die." "Safety is an illusion," Haldir says from nearby, his tone not unkind. "Even in the Golden Wood, we are not safe. We choose only where we will face danger, not weather." Owen looks at him sharply. "And you chose to face it here, in a war that is not yours." Haldir meets her gaze steadily. "It is ours now," he says. "We chose to make it so." There is something in his words that strikes deep in her. A choice, not a duty laid upon her by others, but a decision of her own will. She returns to her work, her thoughts troubled. Outside, the battle grinds on. The loss of the wall has turned the outer defense into a slaughterhouse. The Uruk-hai pour through the gap in ever-increasing numbers, their torches flaring as they surge toward the keep. Aragorn orders a fighting retreat, his voice cutting through the chaos. Back to the Hornburg! Fall back in order! Do not break ranks! The Rohirrim obey as best they can, though fear gnaws at them. Many have never fought in such a battle. The sight of the elves, blooded yet unbroken, steadies them. Gimli, panting, his armor dented, his beard clotted with gore, falls in beside Aragorn as they climb the causeway. This is more like it, he huffs. A proper last stand. Aragorn gives him a sidelong look. Let us hope it is not our last, he says. Legolas limps out to meet them at the gate, his leg bound, his face pale but determined. You look terrible, he remarks to Gimli. The dwarf grins fiercely. You should see the other fellows, he retorts. Haldir takes his place on the wall of the Hornburg, his remaining archers arrayed around him. Their numbers are diminished, many lie broken on the collapsed section of the deeping wall, but their eyes are as keen as ever. He looks down at the sea of orcs seething below, at the torches bobbing like malevolent fireflies. He feels the weight of every life lost under his command. He thinks of Galadriel, of Celeborn, of the golden wood that may never see some of these warriors return. He thinks of the long years of watchful peace, of the song sung under the stars, of the laughter of children in the glades. He wonders if they will remember this night, if they will know where their fathers fell. Captain, says the young standard-bearer beside him, his voice tight, do you think we will see Lorien again? Haldir does not lie. I do not know, he says, but I know that if we fall here, we fall as we should, with blades in our hands, standing for something beyond ourselves. The young elf swallows, then nods. Then I am content, he says quietly. Haldir reaches out and squeezes his shoulder once, briefly. Then he draws his bow. The Uruk-hai bring up battering rams, heavy logs capped with iron. They pound at the gate of the Hornburg, each impact reverberating through the stone. Theoden stands in the courtyard, his sword drawn, his face set. So much death, he murmurs. What can men do against such reckless hate? Aragorn steps to his side. Ride out with me, he says. Ride out and meet them. Theoden's eyes flash. For death and glory, he asks. For Rohan, Aragorn replies. For your people, for every child in that hall. Theoden looks up at the sky, where the clouds are beginning to thin, the faintest hint of gray replacing black. The sun may yet rise, he says softly. Legolas, listening, feels a shiver run through him. The sun and Gandalf with it. If they can hold a little longer. Haldir hears it too in the tone of the wind, in the way the darkness seems less absolute. He thinks of Galadriel's foresight, of the slender road she spoke of. Hold, he tells his archers. Hold until the last arrow. The gate shudders, cracks splintering across its surface. A great beam snaps. The next blow will bring it down. Theoden lifts his sword. To me, Eorlingus, he cries, fell deeds awake. Now for wrath, now for ruin, and a red dawn. The horns of Rohan sound again, joined now by the high, clear note of elven horns. Men and elves mount, those who still have horses. Others ready themselves to run out on foot, to die in the open, rather than be trapped like rats in a cage. The gate bursts inward. A torrent of Uruk-hai surges through, roaring. They are met by a storm of arrows from the walls, by the charge of Theoden and Aragorn, by the axes of dwarves and the spears of elves. For a few glorious moments, the defenders drive the enemy back, their fury like a living thing. Haldir, from his vantage, sees it all. The king of Rohan riding like the kings of old, his white hair flying, Aragorn at his side, Anduril blazing, Gimli laughing, as he hews Legolas, limping yet deadly, every arrow he looses finding a throat, an eye, a heart. He sees, too, the sheer number of orcs still waiting beyond, the endless press of black armor and pale faces. He knows this cannot last. "Captain," says the young standard-bearer again, his voice barely audible over the din, "if we fall, will it matter?" Haldir watches as a group of Rohirrim, inspired by the sight of elves fighting beside them, rally and push forward, driving the orcs back from the very steps of the hall where the women and children wait. "Yes," he says, "it will matter." The sky lightens further. A shaft of pale dawn pierces the clouds, glancing off the wet stone, catching in the facets of elven mail. For an instant, the battlefield is painted in silver and gray, stark and beautiful. On the ridge above the deeping coombe, a lone rider appears, white against the dark. Then another and another, until the crest is lined with horsemen, their spears gleaming. Gandalf the White raises his staff, and the light of the rising sun flares blinding. "Look to the east!" Aragorn shouts, his voice ragged with exhaustion and hope. The Uruk-hai falter, their eyes screwed shut against the sudden brilliance. Some snarl and press on, others hesitate. From the ridge, the riders of Rohan charge, their cries like thunder. Relief crashes over the defenders like a wave. Men who had been on the verge of collapse find new strength. Elves straighten, their eyes alight. Haldir feels something in his chest unclench. "They came," he murmurs, but Saruman's will does not break so easily. He pours his malice into his creatures, driving them on. The fire-wrought things, though wounded, lurch toward the Hornburg, their bodies cracking, flames licking from their wounds. One of them reaches the base of the tower itself. Haldir sees it too late. He had been focused on the gate, on the tide of orcs there. Now, as the creature lays its burning hands against the tower's foundation, he understands. If the tower falls, the hall will crumble. The women and children will die. Theoden, Aragorn, all of them will be buried. He does not hesitate. "Cover me!" he shouts to his nearest archers and leaps from the wall. He lands on a lower parapet, then drops again, rolling as he hits the ground. Pain flares in his ankle, but he pushes it aside. The fire creature is before him, its attention fixed on the stone under its hands. Cracks spiderweb outward, glowing at the edges. Haldir runs. Arrows from his archers pepper the creature's back, some sinking in, others bursting into flame. It roars, but does not turn. Haldir reaches it and drives his spear into the gap between its shoulder blades. The blade sinks deep, and for a moment there is a strange stillness. Then the creature explodes. Flame and stone and flesh burst outward in a blinding blossom. The shockwave throws Haldir backward, slamming him into the base of the tower. Heat sears his skin, his armor, his very hair. On the wall, Legolas screams his name, "Haldir!" When the smoke clears, the fire creature is gone, its body scattered in smoldering chunks. The tower stands, its foundation blackened but intact. Haldir lies crumpled against the stone, his cloak charred, his spear a twisted wreck beside him. His chest rises and falls shallowly. Legolas limps down to him, heedless of orcs, of arrows. He drops to his knees, gathering Haldir's head into his lap. "Haldir," he whispers. "Do not go." Haldir's eyes flutter open. He focuses with effort on Legolas' face. A faint smile touches his lips. "You are always so dramatic," he murmurs. Legolas laughs through his tears. Says the one who leapt from a wall to embrace a fire demon. Haldir's gaze drifts past him, to the hall, to the tower he saved, to the sky brightening above. "Worth it," he says softly. Legolas swallows hard. "We need you," he says, Lorien needs you. Haldir's eyes return to his. There is peace in them and a weary sorrow. Lorien will endure, he says, in memory, if nowhere else. Tell the lady we stood. Tell her we did not fail her. You did not. Legolas says, his voice breaking. You did not. Haldir's hand lifts, trembling, to touch Legolas' cheek. Then, it is enough, he whispers. His hand falls. His chest stills. For a moment, amid the chaos of battle, time seems to stop. Legolas bows his head over Haldir's still face. Around them, the sounds of war fade to a dull roar. On the ramparts, an elf raises his voice in a keening lament, high and piercing. Others take it up, their song weaving through the clash of steel and the screams of the dying, a thread of pure sorrow. The Rohirrim hear it and shiver. They do not understand the words, but they understand the grief. Aragorn, seeing Legolas kneeling beside Haldir's body, feels a cold weight settle in his gut. Another life, another light, extinguished in this war he has chosen to fight. He thinks of Galadriel, of the burden she bears. He wonders if she feels this loss as it happens, if some chord in her heart snaps. Far away, under the golden leaves of Lorien, Galadriel stands very still. Her hand tightens on the rail of her high flet until the wood creaks. Celeborn, watching her, knows without asking. Who? He says softly. Haldir, she answers, her voice thin. My brave Haldir. Celeborn closes his eyes. He had opposed this plan, had argued, had pleaded. Now the cost is counted in names he knows, in faces he has watched for centuries. Do you regret it? He asks. Galadriel does not answer at once. She looks eastward, her gaze piercing hill and plain, stone and storm. She sees, dimly, the battle at Helm's Deep, the charge of the Rohirrim from the ridge, the breaking of Saruman's host. She sees Theoden, alive, riding down orcs with a fury that will carry into other battles. She sees Aragorn, his resolve hardened by the sight of elven blood spilled for his cause. She sees Legolas, kneeling in grief, his heart bound more tightly to the fate of men than ever before. She sees, beyond, the flicker of a small figure climbing a dark mountain, the weight of a ring dragging at his neck, and the faint, stubborn light in his eyes. I regret that they had to die, she says at last. I do not regret that they chose to stand. Celeborn's jaw tightens. And if more must die, if this is only the beginning? Galadriel's eyes glisten. Then we will bear it, she says, as we have borne so much else. Until the end at Helm's Deep, the end of this battle is at hand. Gandalf's arrival with Erkenbrand has broken the back of Saruman's assault. The Uruk-hai, caught between the hammer of the riders and the anvil of the Hornburg, begin to falter, then break. Some flee toward the forest that has appeared overnight at the edge of the Deeping Coombe, a dark wall of ancient trees that were not there before. They vanish into its shadows, and terrible sounds follow. The cracking of bone, the creak of branches, the low rumbling anger of the horns. Others fight to the last, snarling, until they are cut down. When at last the sun rises fully, its light falls on a field of ruin. Bodies lie in heaps, orc and man and elf together. The stones of Helm's Deep are stained black and red. The survivors stand amid the wreckage, dazed. Theoden leans on his sword, his shoulders slumped. He looks older than he did even the day before, but there is a new steadiness in his gaze. We have won a battle, he says quietly to Aragorn, who stands beside him, and Dural's blade darkened with blood. But not the war. Aragorn nods. No, he agrees. But this victory will be sung in ages to come. and they will sing of Rohan and of the Galadhrim who came to its aid. Theoden's eyes flick toward the elven dead being gathered with care by their kin. He swallows. I misjudged them, he admits. I thought them aloof, uncaring, yet they bled for us. Aragorn's gaze follows his. They chose to share our doom, he says. It is a gift and a burden. Legolas kneels beside Haldir's body, now laid out with the others. He has cleaned the blood from his face, smoothed his hair. Haldir's hands are folded over his chest, his twisted spear replaced with a straight, unbroken one, its tip wrapped in white cloth. Gimli stands a short distance away, uncomfortable with the rawness of elven grief. He clears his throat. He died well, he says gruffly. Legolas looks up at him, his eyes redrimmed but clear. He died as he chose, he replies. That is all any of us can ask. Gimli shifts, then nods. Aye, he says, and if it is any comfort, I have tallied my count. 42. He pauses. You? Legolas blinks, then huffs a soft, incredulous laugh. 41, he admits. You have won! Gimli's grin is fierce. Ha! There you have it. Dwarven steel surpasses elven grace at last. Legolas shakes his head, the faintest smile tugging at his mouth. Enjoy your victory, Master Dwarf, he says. It may be your last. The banter is thin, a fragile bridge over a chasm of sorrow. But it is something. It is life. Elsewhere among the dead, a young elf sits beside the body of the standard-bearer who had asked Haldir if they would see Lorien again. His hands tremble as he adjusts the fallen elf's cloak. A Rohirrim youth approaches, hesitating. He saved my life, the man says awkwardly. When the wall fell, he pulled me back. When I slipped, I would have died. The young elf looks up, his eyes brimming. He was always pulling others back, he says. Always between us and danger, the man swallows. I will tell my children, he says, and they will tell theirs. We will not forget him, or any of you. The elf studies him, then nods slowly. Then some part of him will live, he says. In your tales, the man offers his hand. There is a brief, awkward pause. Then the elf takes it. In that clasp, something shifts. The bond between elves and men, frayed by time and mistrust, is reforged in the blood of Helm's Deep. In Minas Tirith, weeks later, when the beacons blaze and the Rohirrim ride to Gondor's aid, that bond will matter. Word of the Galadhrim's stand at Helm's Deep spreads like fire on dry grass. It passes from soldier to soldier, from tavern to hall, from Rohan to Gondor and beyond. In the courts of Denethor, some scoff. Too little, too late, they say. The elves hid in their woods while we bled for centuries, but others, younger, less bound by old grievances, listen with shining eyes. They came, they say. When it mattered, they came. In the camps before Minas Tirith, as the great siege looms, men from the west fold who survived Helms. Deep tell their comrades of fair warriors with eyes like starlight, of arrows that never missed, of a captain who leapt upon a creature of fire to save a tower full of children. They speak of how the elves died. They speak, too, of how they stood. Among those who listen is a young man of Gondor named Beregond. He had grown up under Denethor's shadow, taught to distrust all beyond the borders of his city. But the tales of Helm's Deep unsettle something in him. He will remember them when he meets a halfling in the citadel, when he chooses to defy orders to save a life. The knowledge that others, older and fairer and with more to lose, chose to stand for strangers will weigh in his decision. In Lorien, the return of the survivors is both joy and knife. They come in smaller numbers than they left. Their march is slower, weighted by grief. They bear with them not only their own wounded, but the bodies of some of their fallen, wrapped in white and gold. Galadriel descends from her high flet to meet them. Her face is composed, but her eyes are very bright. The young elf, who had sat beside the standard-bearer's body, kneels before her, his head bowed. "My lady," he says, his voice rough, "we did as you commanded. We stood with the men of Rohan. We held until morning." Galadriel reaches out and lifts his chin. "You did more than I commanded," she says. "You chose to give your light to their darkness. I am proud of you, all of you." Celeborn moves among the returning warriors, clasping shoulders, murmuring words in Sindarin. He pauses beside one who leans heavily on a staff, his leg bound. "You have a wound that will not heal fully," Celeborn observes. The elf nods. "The healers say I will walk, but I will never again run as I did." Celeborn's gaze is grave. "Then you will walk in the west when you go," he says, "and you will carry this memory with you. The sea will be no less wide for it, but perhaps the shores will feel less strange." The elf swallows. "I do not know if I will go," he admits. "After what I saw, there is still so much here that needs us." Celeborn studies him. "Our time is ending," he says gently. But endings are not always sudden. Some fade slowly, some linger like the echo of a song. Galadriel, standing nearby, hears and smiles faintly, and some, she adds, leave a harmony behind in the voices of those who remain. In Rivendell, Elrond receives news of Helm's Deep with mixed feelings. He had counseled caution, had urged the elves to withdraw, to leave the world of men to its own fate. Yet he cannot deny the effect the Galadhrim stand has had. Aragorn arrives there briefly, on his way south with the paths of the dead heavy before him. He and Elrond speak in the Hall of Fire, their words low. "The choice of Lorien has bound you more tightly to the fate of men," Elrond says. "Do you understand that, Estelle?" Aragorn meets his gaze steadily. "I do," he says. "When I saw Haldir fall, when I saw elven blood spilled for my cause, I knew there was no turning back. I cannot hide from my destiny when others have given their lives to clear its path." Elrond's eyes are sorrowful. "And when you are gone, when your line has passed, they will not be here to guide your children." "No," Aragorn agrees, "but their memory will. The tales of what they did will shape the men who come after. That is a different kind of guidance." Elrond looks into the fire, seeing in it both the past and the future. "Perhaps," he says softly, "perhaps that is enough." On the slopes of Mount Doom, Frodo and Sam struggle under a sky of ash and fire. They do not know of Helm's Deep, of Haldir, of the Galadhrim. They do not know of Rohirrim or Gondorians or elves dying in their thousands. But the world's fate presses on them all the same. In some deep, unconscious way, Frodo feels the weight of all those choices, all those stands. He feels that he is not alone, that others have given everything so that he might reach this place. It does not make the ring lighter, but it makes his resolve heavier. He takes another step. At the Black Gate, when Aragorn stands before the armies of Mordor with a pitifully small host, he remembers Helm's Deep. He remembers how hopeless it seemed, how the wall fell, how the orcs poured in. He remembers, too, how the elves came, how they held, how they died. He looks at the men beside him, at Gimli and Legolas, at the standard of the white tree fluttering in the foul wind. He raises his sword. "For Frodo," he says, but in his heart there are other names. Haldir, the young standard-bearer, the nameless elves who stood at the wall. He charges. In the end, the ring is destroyed. Sauron falls. The world is remade in small ways and great. In this timeline, that remaking carries a slightly different flavor. The Age of Men dawns not in the absence of elves, but in the shadow of their last great gift. In Minas Tirith, in the years after the coronation of King Elessar, songs of Helm's Deep are sung in the halls of men. They do not only praise Theoden and Aragorn, they speak of the Galadhrim, of their shining mail, of their unerring arrows, of their sorrowful songs. Children in Gondor play it, being elves of Lorien as often as they play it, being riders of Rohan. They tie bits of cloth to sticks for bows. They paint stars on their brows. They pretend to speak in fair flowing tongues. In Rohan, the memory is sharper, more immediate. The Westfold folk tell their tales with tears and pride. They remember the Elven captain who died to save their king's hall, the Elven archers who stood beside their old men on the wall. In the golden hall of Meduseld, a tapestry is woven depicting the battle. It shows Theoden on his horse, Aragorn at his side, Gimli and Legolas fighting back to back. It shows, too, a line of elves on the wall, their bows drawn. Above them, in gold thread, a single star. Eowyn, now Lady of Ithilien with Faramir, sometimes walks its length with her children. She tells them of that night, of fear and courage, of choices. She tells them of Haldir. He said, "Safety is an illusion," she says, her hand resting on the head of her youngest. He chose to face danger where it would mean something. Remember that, when you must choose. In Lorien, the leaves still fall golden, but there are fewer voices under them. The departure of the Galadhrim to the west comes sooner in this timeline. The losses at Helm's Deep and later in the war hasten their weariness. Galadriel and Celeborn stand together on the shore as the white ships are loaded. The gulls wheel overhead, crying, "Do you regret it?" Celeborn asks again, as he had once before. Galadriel looks back toward the fading line of the Anduin, toward the lands where men now rule. She sees the white city gleaming, the fields of Rohan green, the Shire peaceful. She sees two small things: a boy in Gondor carving an elf's face into the prow of a toy boat, a girl in Rohan braiding her hair with a single golden thread, pretending it is Elven, a man in the east, once an enemy, hearing tales of the Galadhrim and wondering if all the West is not as he had been told. "I regret only that we could not do more," she says, "but we did enough." Celeborn studies her profile, the way the sea wind lifts her hair. "And if men forget," he asks quietly, "if in time we become only stories, and those stories fade." Galadriel's eyes are on the horizon, where the sun sinks into a blaze of red and gold. "Then it will be as it must," she says. "We were always meant to be a tale in the end, but for a little while we were also a presence. We stood beside them. That will echo, even if they do not know its source." Legolas, standing a short distance away, listens. He has chosen in this timeline to delay his own sailing. The pull of the sea tugs at him, but the pull of the world he has helped save tugs harder. He remembers Haldir's hand on his cheek, his last words. He remembers the faces of men at Helm's Deep, at Minas Tirith, at the Black Gate. He thinks of Gimli, of their strange, fierce friendship. He thinks of the glittering caves of Aglarond, of the trees of Ithilien. He will go west one day, but not yet. "Come," he says to Galadriel and Celeborn. "The tide waits for no one, not even the wise." They board the ship. As it pulls away from the shore, Galadriel stands at the prow, her hand resting on the rail. She looks back one last time at Middle-earth. In the distance, barely visible, a single star appears in the darkening sky. It is not hers. It belongs to no one. It shines, indifferent and eternal, over a world where men now bear the weight of their own fate, but where, in quiet songs and half-remembered tales, the echo of elven steel at Helm's Deep still rings. In a small farmhouse in the West Fold, generations after the war, an old woman tells her grandchildren a story by the hearth. Her voice is thin but steady, and there we were, she says, huddled in the hall of the king, listening to the battle outside. We thought we would die. Then we heard a song high and strange, unlike any I had ever heard. It was the elves, they said, the elves of Lorien, come to fight for us. The children's eyes are wide. Were they real, grandmother? One asks. Not just stories? She smiles, her gaze distant. They were real, she says. I saw one just once after the battle. He was singing over his captain's body. His hair was like sunlight on water, and his eyes were so sad and so kind. He looked at me and smiled, and I was not afraid anymore. What happened to them? Another child asks. Where did they go? The old woman stares into the fire. The flames dance, throwing shadows on the walls. Outside, the wind sighs through the eaves. They went away, she says softly. Over the sea, they say, but sometimes, when the wind is just so and the stars are bright, I think I can hear that song again, faint and far, like an echo. And I remember that for one night, long ago, we were not alone. The children fall silent, listening to the crackle of the fire, to the faint hiss of the wind. Above the house, above the fields of Rohan, above the white city and the dark mountains in the quiet shire, the stars wheel in their ancient courses. One of them glints off a forgotten shard of elven mail, half buried in the earth near Helm's Deep, where grass has grown over bones and stone alike. It is a small thing, that glimmer. No one sees it, but for an instant, as the light catches and fades, it is as if a blade of elven steel were drawn once more in the dark, and a voice from a vanished people whispered across the years, we were here, we chose to stand, and the night, remembering, is a little less deep.